Part 1. The Call to Adventure. Long ago, in the port city of Joppa, Caleb was renowned as a merchant of impeccable character. He traded in spices, fabrics, and fine pottery, but what set him apart was his reputation for fairness and honesty. Customers trusted Caleb's scales and admired his humility. Yet Caleb felt a void within himself. Though his coffers were full, his soul longed for a purpose greater than wealth. One quiet evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Caleb sat in his garden, pondering his life. Suddenly, an elderly man appeared before him, his presence calm but commanding. The man wore a weathered robe and held a staff. "Caleb of Joppa," the man began, his voice steady, "you have earned the respect of men, but will you pass the test of the heart? The Lord has chosen you for a journey, one that will define your legacy." Caleb, startled, asked, "Who are you, and what test do you speak of?" The man continued, "In the city of Shalem lies a treasure, but only a man of true wisdom and integrity can claim it. Will you answer this call?" Despite his apprehension, Caleb's curiosity stirred. "What must I do?" he asked. "Travel to Shalem, but beware, the journey is fraught with trials. You will be tested not in strength, but in faith, wisdom, and character," the man said. Before Caleb could respond, the man vanished, leaving only his staff behind. Caleb felt a deep conviction settle in his heart. At dawn, he loaded his caravan and began the journey, leaving the comforts of Joppa behind. Part 2. The first test, the beggar by the road. The road to Shalem was long and arduous, cutting through rocky terrain and barren fields. Caleb's caravan carried just enough provisions for the journey. As he traveled, he encountered a frail beggar sitting by the roadside. The man, clad in rags, extended a trembling hand. "Please, kind sir," he pleaded, "spare a morsel of bread, for I have not eaten in days." Caleb hesitated. He had planned his supplies carefully, knowing the journey ahead would demand every resource. But looking into the man's sunken eyes, he felt a pang of compassion. He reached into his satchel and handed the beggar a loaf of bread and a small flask of water. The beggar smiled weakly and said, "You have given more than food. You have shared hope. May the Lord bless your journey." As Caleb resumed his travels, he reflected on the encounter. Though his supplies were now diminished, his heart felt lighter. Part 3. The Storm and the Shelter. Days later, dark clouds gathered on the horizon. A fierce storm swept through the land, lashing Caleb's caravan with rain and wind. Struggling to keep his goods dry, Caleb prayed for guidance. Amid the chaos, he spotted a small, abandoned shack. Though it provided little comfort, it shielded him from the worst of the storm. Inside, he found a tattered blanket and an old lantern. That night, as the storm raged outside, Caleb reflected on his journey. "The road is harder than I imagined," he thought. But in his heart, he felt a quiet reassurance. Every trial was preparing him for something greater. Part 4. The City of Shalem. After weeks of travel, Caleb finally reached Shalem. The city was a marvel of culture and commerce, its markets brimming with traders from distant lands. Precious silks, rare spices, and glittering jewels adorned the stalls. But Caleb remembered the old man's words, "Seek not gain but purpose." At the city gates, a royal messenger approached him. "Are you Caleb of Joppa?" the messenger asked. "Yes," Caleb replied. "The king has summoned you," the man said. Caleb followed the messenger to the palace, a grand structure with towering columns and intricate mosaics. King Eliab awaited him in the throne room. "Caleb," the king said, "I have heard of your honesty and wisdom. I offer you a challenge. 3 doors lie before you. Behind one is the treasure you seek. The others hold ruin. Choose wisely." Caleb's heart pounded. The task was simple yet profound. "May I take time to prepare?" he asked. The king nodded. "You have 3 days." Part 5. Observing Shalem. Determined to understand the city, Caleb spent the next 3 days walking its streets. He watched merchants haggle in the market, some using deceitful tactics while others conducted business with fairness. One evening, he met a potter named Miriam. She gave a clay jar to a struggling mother, refusing payment. "Why would you do that?" Caleb asked. Miriam replied, "Because kindness, like clay, can shape lives." Her words resonated deeply with Caleb. He realized that wisdom often revealed itself in acts of selflessness. Part 6. The Final Choice. On the 3rd day, Caleb stood before the 3 doors in the palace. Each was adorned with symbols. One bore a crown, symbolizing power, another a chest of gold, representing wealth, and the third an open book, signifying wisdom. Caleb prayed silently, seeking guidance. He recalled the beggar's blessing, the storm's lesson, and Miriam's words. The choice became clear. "I choose the door of wisdom," he declared. The king smiled and opened the door, revealing an ancient scroll. "This," the king said, "is the treasure of Shalem, wisdom passed down through generations. It is more valuable than gold or power." Part 7. The Return Home. Caleb returned to Joppa with the scroll, sharing its teachings with his community. The lessons of his journey, compassion, humility, and integrity, transformed the lives of those around him. In time, Caleb became a leader not for his wealth, but for his wisdom. His legacy endured, proving that the greatest treasures are those that enrich the soul. Part 8. The Seeds of Wisdom. Upon his return to Joppa, Caleb stood before the elders of the city and unrolled the ancient scroll from Shalem. The parchment was filled with proverbs, teachings, and parables that challenged the way people live their lives. One passage read, "A man's true wealth is found in what he sows in the hearts of others." Inspired, Caleb began sharing the scroll's wisdom, but he faced resistance. Many merchants mocked him, claiming, "Words cannot fill our coffers or feed our children." Caleb, however, remained steadfast. He invited anyone willing to listen to gather at the town square each evening. Day by day, his gatherings grew. Among the attendees was a young orphan named Liora, who often sat at the edge of the crowd. She watched Caleb intently, her eyes filled with both curiosity and doubt. One night, as the crowd dispersed, Liora approached Caleb. "If wisdom is so powerful," she asked, "why does it not heal my hunger or give me a home?" Caleb knelt to her level and replied, "True wisdom changes hearts, and from changed hearts come the actions that can transform lives. Come, let me show you." Part 9. Restoring a Community. Determined to prove his words, Caleb began using his wealth, not for trade but for building. He constructed a communal granary where merchants and farmers could store surplus crops to feed the poor during times of famine. At first, many doubted the idea, fearing that their contributions would be stolen or misused. But Caleb introduced a system of trust and transparency, inspired by the scroll's teachings. Slowly, the granary became a symbol of hope. Liora, eager to help, began working there, distributing food to the needy. Her skepticism melted as she saw the impact of Caleb's vision. One day, she found Caleb staring at the horizon. "Why do you do all this?" she asked. Caleb smiled and said, "Because someone once gave me bread when I was hungry, not just for food, but for purpose. Now it is my turn to pass it on." Part 10. The Merchant's Betrayal. Despite Caleb's growing influence, not everyone was pleased with his success. One merchant, Ezra, grew envious, believing Caleb's new fame threatened his own business. Ezra devised a plan to discredit Caleb. He spread rumors that the scroll Caleb brought from Shalem was a forgery, and that his teachings were designed to manipulate the people for his own gain. The rumors spread quickly, and Caleb's gatherings began to shrink. Even some of his closest allies doubted him. Liora, however, remained by his side. "Do you believe the truth will prevail?" she asked. Caleb nodded. "Truth is like a seed. It may take time to grow, but its roots run deep." To confront the accusations, Caleb invited Ezra to a public debate in the square. Ezra brought his finest orators and attempted to humiliate Caleb with sharp words and clever arguments. But Caleb did not respond with anger or defensiveness. Instead, he shared the stories of those who had been helped by the wisdom of the scroll. He spoke of the beggar, the storm, and the kindness he had witnessed in Shalem. The crowd listened intently, and by the end, even Ezra was silent. Part 11. The Lost Letter. One day, while organizing the scroll, Caleb discovered a hidden pocket in its cover. Inside was a letter addressed to the Keeper of Wisdom. The letter read, "To the one who values wisdom above all, remember this. The treasure is not in the words, but in how they are lived. Pass them on, not as teachings, but as acts of love." Caleb realized that his journey was far from over. The scroll's wisdom was not meant to be hoarded, but shared in ways that would ripple across generations. Part 12. The Legacy of Caleb. Years passed, and Caleb's influence continued to grow. He taught merchants to trade fairly, farmers to share their harvests, and leaders to govern with compassion. Liora, once a skeptical orphan, became one of his most devoted disciples. She eventually took over the granary, expanding its reach to neighboring towns. Before his death, Caleb gathered his community one last time. "The greatest treasure," he told them, "is not gold or power, but a life lived for others. Remember the scroll's wisdom, but more importantly, live it." When Caleb passed, the people of Joppa built a small monument in his honor. But his true legacy lived on in the lives he had touched and the seeds of wisdom he had planted. Liora, standing at his gravesite, whispered, "Your faith has shaped my life. I will continue your journey, Caleb." And so, the teachings of Shalem spread far and wide, carried by those who understood that the most enduring treasures are the ones that transform hearts. Part 13, the final test. As Caleb's health waned, word of his deeds reached distant lands. One day, a caravan arrived in Joppa, bringing with it an emissary from a neighboring kingdom. The emissary carried a letter from King Malchiah, a ruler known for his wisdom and fairness. The letter read, "Caleb of Joppa, your reputation precedes you. I invite you to my court to advise on matters of great importance. But before you come, I ask one question. What is the greatest legacy a leader can leave behind?" Caleb pondered the question for days, knowing it was not just a query, but a test of his life's work. Despite his frailty, he called Liora to his side. "Liora," he said, "this question is not for me alone to answer. What do you believe is the greatest legacy?" Liora thought carefully, recalling all she had learned from Caleb. "It is not wealth, power, or fame. It is the lives we transform and the love we leave behind." Caleb smiled. "Then that is the answer we shall give." Part 14, the journey to the king. Though his body was weak, Caleb insisted on traveling to King Malchiah's court, accompanied by Liora and a small group of followers. The journey was arduous, but Caleb's spirit remained strong. When they arrived, the king welcomed them with great respect. In his court were nobles, advisors, and foreign dignitaries, all eager to hear Caleb's response. Caleb stood before them, leaning on Liora for support. "A leader's greatest legacy," he began, "is not found in monuments or riches. It is in the hearts of those they serve. True leadership inspires others to live with integrity, compassion, and purpose." The court was silent for a moment, then erupted into applause. King Malchiah rose from his throne and said, "You speak the truth, Caleb of Joppa. Your wisdom will guide this kingdom for generations." Part 15, Caleb's final lesson. After the audience with the king, Caleb's health deteriorated rapidly. He knew his time was near. He called Liora and his followers to his bedside. "My journey began with a storm," he said, his voice soft but clear. "I thought the treasure I sought was gold or power, but the true treasure was the wisdom I found along the way. Now, it is your turn to carry it forward." He handed the scroll to Liora. "This is no longer my burden, but yours. Remember, its value is not in the words, but in the lives you change with them." As dawn broke, Caleb took his final breath, surrounded by those whose lives he had transformed. Part 16, the legacy of Caleb. Liora, now a leader in her own right, continued Caleb's work. She expanded the granary system, established schools to teach the wisdom of the scroll, and inspired others to live lives of service and compassion. Years later, when Liora became old, she told Caleb's story to a new generation. "He was a man who began with little," she said, "but gave everything to others. His legacy lives in each of us." The monument in Joppa grew into a place of pilgrimage, where people came to learn about Caleb's teachings. But the true monument was in the lives of the countless individuals who had been touched by his kindness and wisdom. And so, the story of Caleb and the scroll from Shalem became a beacon of hope, reminding all who heard it that the greatest treasures are the ones that inspire love, unity, and growth.